Okay, summary of day one. Fortunately, it's going to be pretty short today because most of our morning focused on summarizing results from workshop 2 and from our workshop in January. So we've recorded a couple of the main takeaway points, but right now what we really need from all of you is feedback on what we've still missed. So we have first the ACAR model. We have higher sigma model for this GMPE. A few points about it. It's controlled by the fee, and it's not explained by a number of earthquake recordings. And it's related to the quality of the metadata. What's missing? Processing of records.
So I just add, is it related to processing of the data, right? You want to say non-uniform processing, probably.
I want a Mac.
Okay.
Yeah, can we keep it out of presentation mode because I'm going to edit.
Okay, so I just put in another line. Could be related to non-uniform processing of the data. Correct, Yusuf? Yeah. And that's really a key for it. Is this a fee model that we need to consider or not?
Because it was new to me. It said since these records are coming from different countries in Europe, so they're processing it differently. And I don't know really that's the root of this, but that's what he was saying.
So different methods of processing it, or just groups of people?
Non-uniform, I think, is right.
Okay.
Sorry, this is Carola. For the ACARS database, they have performed the uniform processing under the resource effort, but that can be double-checked. But there are documentations about the processing.
So why don't you put a "is it" in front of that?
Double check?
Well, just as a question, just say, instead of "it is related," just put "is it related?" question mark there. Otherwise, what is the fundamental cause for such a large fee?
Bob?
Possibly more
I'm
variable.
sorry? Maybe. I can't put it in presentation mode because I can't modify it. How's this? Better? Okay.
Possibly more variable site conditions. And more variable site conditions.
We've seen that in the Japanese data, for example. So we see more variability in the rock sites, right? And I don't know if that's the same in the European data or not.
Okay, XSIM. So we saw that close in for XSIM, we have very large high frequencies, and it's also magnitude dependent. So it hasn't yet been explained. It's not yet clear why this is a function of magnitude as well for XSIM. So that needs to be explained. Gail brought up that there are numerical issues at zero distance, so we just note that and don't do that. For the validation, XSIM was similar to the other methods, close in, within 5 kilometers. And then, as Christine told us, only 5 data points were used in the Part A validations for distances larger than 5 kilometers for XSIM, less than 5 kilometers.
But this is going to be a key, one of the issues for us in terms of weighting. What is the weight we assign to XSIM in this case? I think part of it is related to Gail using that 1.3 geometrical spreading term in close, right? So things really ramp up. And it starts to go away when she makes a bigger magnitude. And that's part of what we need to understand. We asked her about this, and there was some discussion, but she sent back a response saying, yes, she's seen this before, or knows this is a feature of the model, and considers that this could be what happens on rock sites, and just left it
Yeah,
at
she
that.
believes it. She said that if we had more data, it would be reasonable to expect that we would see this.
It could be like
It could be, yeah.
Right.
Is there anything we're missing for XM? Yeah.
Jeff, I want to put you on the spot right here. I thought you talked to Gail about those results. That what you saw at very close end. I thought you had resolved that.
She believes.
Yeah, she believes.
She believes it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
You need to pay attention. We just said that before you talked. No. Sorry.
I just want to clarify on Christine's behalf, just to make sure that I understand. So you had mentioned the geometric spreading could be a possible explanation for this, and which would also be consistent with the magnitude dependence that we see. I don't know if you said that or okay. So I think it might be in the sense that if you have a smaller magnitude, you have a smaller fault, so you're sampling fewer distances, say. They're all kind of short distances, whereas if you have a larger magnitude event, you're kind of, maybe averaging over a wider range of distances, and so you're not sensitive quite as much to being in close.
Thanks. So if it's related to her 1.3, then by the time you've got a bigger magnitude, you're reaching out where the 1.3 is no longer such a strong effect, right? As you're averaging a larger distance range. Okay. So 1.0 in the western U.S., but what's used right now in the model? Isn't it 1.3 everywhere? It's 1.0. So Ken is saying she's using a geometrical spreading of 1.0 in the west. We'll double check that.
I'll check on the platform what was the official coefficient.
Yeah, that's what we need to see because that's what we have run. If she's using 1.0 in the west, we need to talk to her then about that if we're implementing it as she intends in the way that we're using the platform. Do you know what you entered, Jeff? Okay. All right. So Christine's going to look that up for us. So that's
Okay. SDSU, we have the bump in 10 hertz, and Kim's going to look into that. Awesome. Thank you. Then we have the issue of the USGS. They gave the IDRIS model a lower weight due to documentation, I believe, and it's not as reliable at larger distances.
So for part of this, we do have, let's say, a little more documentation since we were able to talk to IDRIS.
For IDRIS,
right.
Okay.
And for us, the larger distances for the Avocaine aren't an issue, but that would be an issue for the applicability to, say, the distant Arizona sources.
It's not related to this project.
Closer to your...
It's not related to this project, but one other reason for USGS was lack of a nonlinear site response in his model. That was one reason that USGS lowered.
Just put another bullet. Lack
Sorry,
of
I didn't hear that. I was typing this. Can you repeat that, please?
Lack of nonlinear site response in IDRIS model.
It was not nonlinear. I think it's the fact that they just don't have a soil model. Below,
Yeah.
They don't have a model below 450.
Yeah.
And so they couldn't do maps that were both, because they were interested in doing both soil and rock maps, and they couldn't use a consistent set of ground motion models across that. I don't think it's whether it's nonlinear or not. It's just no soil model.
No soil model.
Or no model for soil below 450. No model for VS30 less than 450 to be precise.
450?
450.
Okay.
For us, that's not a reason, right, since we're working at 760.
Yeah. Not, okay. Moving on then.
Just keep it big and scroll down.
It would be easier on a Mac. Okay. Okay. Issues and approach to the median logic trees. So we have a common functional form. So Nico talked about this. We're using his approach to take our GMPs, generate a common functional form, and then compare back to that. He's used joiner bore distance to do this, but maybe we should do it. He's used rupture distance, but maybe we should do it both for RUP and then also for RJB, and see what we get.
I think this is back to Yusuf's comment that we don't, let's say, suppress a key feature of a model, right, is what we want to do. So we could run it twice. Part of it, I think, is if we do this, we would run hazards in with both sets to see if they're similar. We would then simplify our life and take one of them, but if they're different, we would maintain both sets. And Yusuf is nodding his head yes for those of you online, so that's good.
If they're different, we need to
No,
weight them.
Similar, we just use one.
Use one,
similar in hazard. Similar hazard, we use one.
Pick one, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise,
Maintain both.
and then weight them somehow.
Yeah, I think it's a wise instead of wide.
Are you correcting my spelling errors, Norm?
Yes, I know. I'm enjoying that. Don't get to do that very often.
Oh, yay. All right, so if the sigma of the fit to the GMPs is large, so greater than 0.2, we may need to add the sigma fit to the aleatory variability. And if it's less than 1, then we can ignore it. Any additional?
Yeah, we hadn't been planning on this, but this is something that's been done on other projects when we want a simple way to bring this back in without having to create even more branches in the whole problem. So, Gabe, do you want to comment on?
0.1 may be a little bit too stringent. 0.15, almost 0.2 is probably livable. If you think SRSS.
Yeah, so maybe we should give ourselves if less than if it's changing by less than 0.02 natural log units or 0.01, we can probably drop it, right, on the SRSS. So less than, let's say, 0.02 on log units on the total sigma, because we've already got that uncertainty covered.
Okay. Okay. So when we reparameterize our GMPs, we're generating 1,000 new models. Some of these are going to be physically unrealizable, so we need to remove the ones, we need to remove these cases. So we need a method for that. So we need to add maybe some limits, assign parameter that may be constrained, and add constraints to the sampling of the correlation structure. Is there anything additional we want to include there?
So Bob added, or something else. So
or something else.
Or something else.
Thank
I
you.
had suggested, Nico didn't like the idea, and there may be good reasons for that, but or transformations.
Okay, so transforming it to a variable that is still normal but doesn't go bad,
Or,
right?
well, or say log normally would be the obvious case
Right.
in some situations.
Transform to a don't say no. Transform to a variable that maintains the physical space, right? If we wanted. We know what that means. Physics.
So with those the suites of 1,000 models, I mean, what we're trying to get to is the long-time behavior of these plants. And so if you did the same thing but put in a prior and said, what's the smallest number for the plant that the data would support, and did the inversion, and then you said, what's the largest number that the data would support, then we could plausibly argue we're somewhere between those two. And I think that's all we really can say.
Yeah, and this is actually kind of what we're doing here, but instead of a number, we need to have a whole model. Is the issue?
Well, I understand, but we need to know, given if we tried to push it towards the direction of one or the other, what will the data
allow?
Allow?
And I think the way that I've been looking at this so far is those 1,000 models are already pushing things too far. And that some of those we come back and say they don't look right. And so we're going to come in a little bit from the edge, but we want to see how far out can we go before the data set, we reject and say this just isn't working. And we have confidence in rejecting. That's a big range because we don't have a lot of data to do the constraint. So I think conceptually we're doing what you're saying if we replace value with model in this whole space. Brian?
Yeah. I just have two comments. Before you go on this route of removing what you call non-physical.
Can you put it closer to your mouth?
Sure. Okay. Before you move on, keep pursuing this route of removing non-physical models, I think there are two other things you may consider. One is come out with a better functional form that will result in a lot less non-physical models. And secondly, I think you can also look at different way of characterizing or making inference of the covariance matrix so that the proper correlation between coefficients are properly characterized so that when you generate random GMPE, there is a proper correlation between coefficients so that, for example, it won't give you a lot of oversaturated ground motion.
So turn that into plain English for me, right? So because I can try to understand what you're saying.
Okay.
You want to do the covariance matrix in it. You say it in a different way?
Yeah. Well, there may be other. If I understand correctly, what Nico did is he would fit. He will refit the GMPEs, each individual GMPEs, and get coefficients for each GMPEs, and then he treat those coefficients as multivariate random variables, and then calculate what is the covariance matrix. But there are other statistical methods that will also give you covariance matrix, but has additional properties in there. For example, the mixed effect model, that when
So let me jump in. Okay, we're getting to running mixed effects on the coefficients. Is that what you mean? Okay. Now I got it. All right. So mixed effects. You say covariance in a different way. Run mixed effects model on the. You could just say using the coefficients as the mixed as the. So Bob is saying the model number is the clustering element in that case. Is that what you mean? So using model number, you could say that. GMPEs as the group factor. Okay. So we're taking the regression. Those of you who've been doing random effects, we're going to not have an event term, but we're going to have a whole model term, is what Brian is getting at here, right? And the coefficients then become part of that whole process. Somebody's got to
comparing to, with the empirical data. I already talked to Nico, and he's planning to do it. I think he has to use different subsets of their selected data.
Yeah.
So start with a different subset of data?
New bullet. Just go to a new, make a new slide. Just jump to the next.
Okay, that would be easier.
Okay, so Yusuf is saying use different subsets of the data to compare with the Salmon's maps. And this may be, okay, e.g. main, class 1 only. It could be
Mixed. Sure, we've already done that, right?
Right. That's sort of the class. Yeah, the each database by GMP developer and so forth. Yeah, right. Yeah. Etc. Christine.
So I'm going to repeat something I said last time, and I really appreciate that now you're extrapolating and we have a better sense of the distance and what it means. But I really think it would be useful, at least for me, to see where you push a GMP knowing where the limit is on, say, attenuation with distance, scaling with magnitude, and have those the same way you did your magnitude plus minus and this and that, just so we have an idea of where the space ends that we understand this is where it becomes non-physical or not realistic. There's a way to do that, and I feel better because we know we've reached, the limit of the space. Does that make sense?
You're trying to do what Thomas said, is how far can you push it?
Yes,
right?
But controlling the GMPs that you put at the edge, which becomes your edge.
Okay, so we need to define ones that are not.
As a modeler, oh man, I pushed the scaling here.
Too far.
Yes. I think it would help constrain the range we're looking at. No? Okay, Bob is reacting.
Is this capturing kind of what you're talking about?
You pushed it too far with respect to what you expect the global mean to be, or too far with respect to how uncertain you might be?
Oh, you push it too far where you, as a modeler who understands ground motion, think it should stop as a median model.
As the best central median model, or is my complete uncertainty in what the median should be?
No, because then we're only looking at median models anyways, right? So then
we're looking at the uncertainty in the median model.
Yes, so then maybe you need to add some uncertainty.
That's what we're doing.
Yes, but constrain it to the limit that you understand is plausible. I think it would be helpful. I know I would like.
We talked about that before, saying, can we define the cliff where you can't go further than that in this space, right? But that's the same thing, almost, again, what Tom was saying is, what do the limits of what the data would allow? And that's almost the same issue there. And so, so she said a different way to get to the same issue, since you're not talking into the microphone.
How's that? I like that.
That's fine.
In terms of GMPs, that you know where they start to fail. It's not just based on data.
But now you're into the prior assumptions of how things scale.
Yes, but based on your knowledge as a modeler.
Yeah, can I try to reinterpret that perhaps as saying what are some inadmissible parameter coefficient values? Is that what you're thinking of? Like, for example, geometric attenuation going the wrong way, that sort of thing? Is that what you're thinking of? Okay.
So it's the same of where do we start saying these are not allowed, right? These
but I'm thinking of using those as input as your edge. Constraint, yeah, new model.
Go ahead, Brian.
Okay, I was going to leave this to the TPRP comment, but I'm going to say it anyway now.
Okay. Get to the microphone.
Okay. I sort of agree with what Gabe said, that you use the data twice in your evaluation. And I also agree with you that for GMPE, GMPE includes a description or summary statistic of the available data, but it also includes ways to extrapolate the model to region where there are no data. So when you select the GMPEs for your analysis, you already evaluate those GMPEs and think they are credible GMPEs. So even though they may not fit the data as well as one could, but they represent an expert's judgment. So that's the kind of things you also want to capture, right? Not just the goodness of fit to data. So by going back to data to evaluate those models, you sort of go back to where you were before, where you ignore the values of the expert judgment. And I don't, in the sense of capturing the center body range of expert opinion, by using data to weigh those models, you sort of downweight or ignore the.
Yeah. So I would say we are not ignoring them, but we want to use the subset of the data for that calculation, not to center on the data, but to see if we should broaden our distribution towards that. That is, I have a small set of data. The GMPE developer said I'm not going to try to match that exactly. I'm going to use a broader global model that works in the way that they understand scaling should work. And those few samples I have happen to be high or low, and so they don't want to try to follow it. And so we don't want to overwrite all of the work done in the GMPEs, and I fully agree with that. But at the same time, we could say the data are allowing the GMPEs to move in this direction, and so we can simply broaden our distribution of weights towards the data would be one option, okay, as opposed to broadening it more away from the data. We wouldn't want to broaden it in necessarily a symmetric way. So I still think when we're going to the body of the distribution, I may want to go outside the range of the GMPEs and consider a model that is more consistent with the limited observations, but not saying we're going to take Nico's spider web there and center it on the data. That's never been our plan, but we need something to help us in evaluating all of the aspects that's available. It is reusing the data. This is not an independent update of a Bayesian prior with new information. This is checking the model against a subset of that is particularly applicable to my site, but really sparse. Because now I have that, let me only take strike earthquakes within 20 kilometers, and I'm running out of data, but let's see where those fit. So I don't think we're going to violate exactly what you said, Brian, but we want to, we could say, try to center the model on one spot, but now what do I need to do to the breadth of my distribution?
Okay, that when you have the covariance matrix of the coefficients, that covariance matrix basically gives you an estimate of what the GMPE space looks like. And that space, you can interpret that space as representing the center body and range of the GMPE. So then there may be other ways where you can use that GMPE space to sample from the GMPE space without going back and reevaluate those GMPE against data. You can, since you already have a representation of the center body and range, why don't you just sample?
But are you telling me don't look at the data then?
Well, I'm not telling you anything. I'm just asking you, have you considered other approach where you can directly make use of the GMPE?
So we start with, that's what Nico is showing, we start with the GMPE, he's created the distribution. You could say, I'm going to center on that, that's your model. Okay. Now we want to say, when we look at that, what about where is the data telling me? Is this biased or unbiased compared to the limited sample? This is going to be a bigger issue when we get to the normal faulting one tomorrow, where all of us, I think, did not fit the normal faulting data well. There was so little of it, we didn't want it to override the rest of the scaling we built into our models. But what if, as the next 20 or 30 normal faulting earthquakes occur, they are similar to where our current data are? That's a possibility. It's a chance. We need to consider that these data could be representative, and should I be broadening my uncertainty to capture that model, even though none of the current GMPs get us there? It's really back to how do I think about where the GMPs will be in 10 years when new data comes in, and I might be moving in one direction or another. That's where all evaluation is going to show up.
Okay, here's a suggestion. In a Gaussian world, if I'm not mistaken, in a Gaussian world, when you're applying Bayes, if you bring in new data, you always, even if the data are very far from the prior, you always narrow down the uncertainty, but you may shift it. You may shift the distribution substantially. So one solution to this problem might be you make that comparison, which might shift the distribution and reduce the uncertainty, but you ignore the reduction in the uncertainty. But if you think it's appropriate, follow the shift. Or you apply it in an even more subjective way. So you examine it and then you make a decision as an expert or as a TI and move it as appropriate. But again, but if you're concerned about that double use, using those data twice, then that would be one way to get around that. What Norm suggests, or ignoring the narrowing of the uncertainty, but taking the shift into account. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, keep the breath, and that way you are not, in that sense, you're not double using the data. But in the sense that you are shifting, I would say it's clear that you didn't use it too much in the first place.
I think another point in looking at the data is that when we, all the developed, or the NGA developers, we looked at a big data set, we developed a model that fit that whole data set, and we made decisions and compromises to look at how that model fit globally over the whole data band that we're looking at. And now we're looking at a specific problem that is narrower than the development of those GMPEs. So we need to again look to see exactly how our models work with this in that specific range. I don't think there's any reason not to look at them in a narrower range than in the development phase.
One more thing I think we discussed, somehow you have to check that you cover Linda and Bob's uncertainty in this.
sure we cover the, you could just say, Dan Bob's.
Can I say a couple of things? One, even though I brought up the issue of the using the data twice, I'm not too concerned about it. The other thing is, I would correct what Katie Rogers says, do not narrow uncertainty. You said narrow uncertainty, but take shift and I said do not narrow uncertainty. I know it's very easy when you are there on the spot writing, right?
Okay. Any other key issues here? If not, I think we're going to declare victory for today. Oh, almost got there. Go ahead, Christine.
You asked the question.
I did.
Okay, so geometrical spreading used with XIMs in the West, r to the -1 up to 40 kilometers, and then r to the -0.5.
Okay, so the 1.3 is not an explanation for that.
No.
Where did I put this?
No. So you can delete that, could be an explanation, just delete that line. Geometrical spreading could be explanation.
I don't see it. I'm looking for it.
Go down, down, down. Keep going down. Almost.
Oh, thanks. R to the -1?
Yeah, but you can just delete that.
Okay.
So that whole line, because we think that's not what the issue is. Thank you, Christine. All right. Save what you've got, Katie, so that we'll have it for when we're trying to write things up. We'll,
Is there any other question from the PPRP?
I had a question from earlier when you were talking about the display model, Katie. And
you need to put it right in front of your mouth.
Like this?
Yes.
Okay. So it seemed to me that some of these models you were using were not well centered in the geology, and I was wondering to what degree they were actually validated by the seismic source characterization side of things, because, for instance, you used for the Haas-Greek 22-kilometer depth and only 12 on the shoreline fault. I don't think seismicity goes anywhere near that deep. And then you had the Los Osos fault with the geometry that you show. You cut off the Haas-Greek at depth. And, I mean, I could give you several more examples, but I'm wondering to what degree your models themselves, you're using these to try to validate Model 1 of the SSRS, and to what degree these, the model parameters that go into it may affect your outcome.
So we started with recommendations from the seismic source characterization team, but we couldn't violate Leonard scaling when we ran these simulations. So we wanted to make sure that there was enough slip going on to display ruptures so that we would generate a result that we could see. We wanted an effect that we could see. And so then we worked backwards. We started with the slip to then calculate the dimensions of the fault and the magnitude that we would need so as not to violate that scaling. So it's loosely based on the geology.
But if you're violating the geology, then maybe you need to reconsider some of your scaling.
Yeah, so we're going to hand you to Rob because he'll answer this, but the answer is yes.
Well, yeah, and I would actually say it maybe in a different way. I think what we're doing is parameterizing the rupture in a way that is consistent with what we've seen in previous ruptures. So I think what you said is the depth of seismicity, which I think you're saying that's what the geology is telling you about the fault width.
It's not getting down to 22 kilometers, is it?
Right. But and I would say the depth of seismicity is not telling you how deep the rupture for a large earthquake is going to go. That a large earthquake rupture is going to penetrate beneath that depth of, say, low-level seismicity. The nature of the rupture will change, but you're still actually getting displacement down there. And that's the simulations, the methodology that we're using is consistent with those deeper ruptures. So I see this as there's an apparent inconsistency, but you're really looking at two different things, in my view.
So it's not part of this is there's I'm going to give you a more pragmatic answer than what Rob told you, and that is in doing the simulations and validating how they work, certain sets of scaling relations are required to make them work with other assumptions that are built into how the models generate the ground motion. So right now, we can't go stick in an arbitrary model that from the source characterization in terms of geometry and magnitude and just shove that into the simulations and have things come out. So we've instead set rules where you tell us the magnitude, and we'll use your source characterization to get the distances. But once we take the simulations, we're saying, all right, for that magnitude and distance, now what is the ground motion that comes out of it? Even though it looks like at that point we're not using the same case, we have to use a characterization that went through the validation process. So I think this is an issue that we're going to be working on for several years now going forward in SKEC. How do we get the models to all sort of scale properly? If we change static stress drop, how should the models work? And what Rob is telling you, he's treating that as, well, there's actually deeper slip than what you guys are thinking about. That will happen when a big earthquake occurs. That's a more fundamental issue of difference. But we have to just use the models in a way that they produce reliable ground motions for us, as opposed to fitting the geometries from the source characterization. That's going to be another issue we'll talk about, I think, quite a bit more with the SSC people. All right, anything else from you guys in the front? No?
Is there any